I, I have more pleasure in satisfying my conscience than in satisfying my taste for foods. So again, it's always like a lot of times, and with that example, we have a case of competing pleasures. So it's not just that we're always compelled to seek pleasure; we're also compelled to seek the most pleasant of various options. Um, and think about this. Think about this. If we had a free will, if we had a free will, if people had free wills, everybody on the planet would be entirely blissed out every moment of every day. Um, a free will, by definition, means that we can think whatever we want, regardless of the weather, regardless of what's been happening, what has happened, what will happen, you know. Regardless of anything, our decisions are completely up to us. Our feelings are completely up to us. That's what the doctrine of free will teaches. That what we think, feel, and do is completely up to us. So, I mean, we're we're hardwired to always seek pleasure, but many times we're not successful at that. Think about it. If we had a free will, who among us wouldn't choose to think completely blissful thoughts all the time and to feel completely blissful feelings all the time? You know, it's so clear, it's so obvious. That's what we would do if we would have a free will, like St. Paul discovered in Romans, writing in Romans. If we had a free will, we would do good all the time. When we're confronted with a moral decision, we would never yield to temptation. We would never yield to our emotions that might be driving us to make the wrong decision. So that's a very good way to understand how this hedonic imperative just makes free will impossible. Just considering that if we really did have a free will, that would mean that our feelings would be completely up to us. And naturally, again, who would choose to feel a negative feeling in that case? Okay. There are, as I was saying, other imperatives, other kinds of programming that we're hardwired for, like the pleasure imperative, like the hedonic, like the moral imperative. Okay, for example, we have a reason imperative, and it kind of goes along with the pleasure, with hedonic imperative, in the sense that, like, what we consider when we're making a decision to be the most reasonable of two or more options, it gives us pleasure to be reasonable. But the idea is, like, for example, if we're trying to transfer one liquid from one container to one of two other containers, and one of the containers may not hold the liquid, may not be large enough to hold the liquid, and we're naturally not going to choose to pour the liquid into that container, because it wouldn't make sense to it. It just would oppose our logic, our reason in the case. So naturally, we always do what we consider to be the most reasonable. Now, sometimes we do what's unreasonable because it's not just reason that compels. I mean, this basically what I'm trying to describe is, like, there are so many factors that prohibit free will, that make free will impossible. So, like, let's say we're trying to be reasonable about something, but let's say our emotions kick in. We all have had experiences, for example, when we're discussing something with someone we may love, someone we may care very much about, and we're trying to be reasonable and they're trying to be reasonable, but then these emotions kick in: anger, fear, whatever. And then all of a sudden, we're trying to be reasonable, we can't, because, like, we're like the reason is overridden by this strong emotional component. So actually, that's another imperative, the emotional imperative. We are driven by our most compelling emotions. Um, okay, another imperative is like the survival imperative, the survival instinct. We're gonna choose to do what we do um, based on our consideration of what is going to lead to our greatest chance of survival. We all have that instinct. All animals have that. And again, if we're compelled, if every decision we make is in part based on that, and again, sometimes there are exceptions. Like there's the case of a martyr. Like the demonstrators in Libya, who are giving their lives um, because of the moral imperative. It's like sometimes these imperatives will compete with each other, and that's why the title of the show is the Hedonic imperative, to demonstrate that they all serve the idea of pleasure, of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. In other words, for one person, it might be more important to please their conscience by demonstrating and risking death in Libya than to survive and just like have their conscience pain them in that way. So and the last and there are probably others, but another one is the procreative imperative, just the idea that we have a drive to reproduce, to propagate our species and all. So okay, so basically we have an understanding of why, if we're seeking pleasure, if we're seeking goodness, if we're seeking to be reasonable, if we have these imperatives, but especially the hedonic imperative, the motivation, the basic drive to seek pleasure, then our wills are not free. Our wills are not free of that imperative. We have to seek pleasure. We have to avoid pain. We have no choice in it. And again, why is this important? Well, we live in a world where our entire civilization is founded on an illusion. Our criminal justice system, for example, you have people who have spent years in jail or prison for things that they had absolutely no choice but to do. You have people who may not want to fund our education system because they say, well, people have a free will. You might educate a kid all their life, but at the time they have to make a decision as an adult, that education isn't going to mean anything because of the free will, because they can choose whatever they want. They're just, in our everyday lives, we have interactions with other people, and if we don't recognize that they are compelled to do whatever they do, that they're going to do whatever they feel is either the most right or the most pleasant or the most reasonable, and they have no choice in it, it's not, the choice is not up to them at all, then we're going to be more understanding of them. We're not going to blame them. We're not going to say to ourselves, they deserve punishment. A good example of this is like, with what's happening in Libya right now. Gaddafi has killed probably over 1,000 civilians, most of them unarmed, and the general tendency is to hate the person, to hold him responsible and hate him. Now, personally, I who understand that Gaddafi is simply doing what he considers to be the most right and what's going to bring him the most pleasure. I mean, he's completely delusional, but in his mind, he thinks he's doing something right, whatever. I can't, from a causal perspective, I can't blame him. I can't assign blame to him. But at the same time, my conscience won't allow me to to kind of like let him off the hook, to not in a certain sense hold him responsible. So what I say to myself is, well, God willing, our military or the Libyans will stop him somehow. It'd be ideal, it'd be the best if he just stepped down. But if he doesn't, then to kill him, to simply just like assassinate him or terminate him in some way, would be justified, because that would like save so many lives. But it's kind of like a decision that I would make not from blame, not from hate, because hate is a very unpleasant emotion. It's very, it's a vile emotion. So sometimes what I'm trying to present here is that abandoning the illusion of free will doesn't mean that we're going to abandon morality and we're going to abandon what's right, what needs to be done, but we can do it from a more understanding perspective. And as a matter of fact, if we treated criminals, people like Gaddafi, with perhaps less hatred, more understanding, then that might be, if our world was structured that way, then people like that might not do the heinous things that they do. For example, in police work, a lot of times there's this strategy of good cop, bad cop. The good cop being understanding, just like, kind of empathizing with the suspect or criminal or something, just like basically taking a causal rather than a free will perspective. And often people find that when people, are addressed in that way, their defenses are lowered. They don't feel, they say to themselves, hey, this person really isn't blaming me. This person understands my predicament. I can trust him. I can, reveal whatever, or I can, admit to whatever. So, okay, so again, this question is very important to both our everyday lives and the structure of our civilization, our society, our world. I hope you have a better understanding of how the hedonic imperative and our always seeking pleasure and avoiding pain makes free will impossible. In the future, we're going to explore other ways of understanding how our wills are not free. And I'm laughing because sometimes I tend to get too serious with this stuff, and my own pleasure imperative reminds me that I should be having a bit more fun. All right, remember to catch our shows at causalconsciousness.com, and we'll see you again soon.